Somebody's got to keep me honest. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate everybody's being here. Going to call the Tuesday, September 3 meeting of the city's Park and Recreation Committee to order. First item of business would be public comment or suggestions on topics that we're going to be covering today. Anybody have anything? We can plow right in. Minutes have been reviewed. Committee members' concerns, questions, pertinent motions. Mr. Neal moves to approve. Mr. Nutting, second. No comments, issues, although, Mr. Smith? Are you seconding? Okay, well, we have an abundance. Very good. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much. We do have a full boat today, and I want to be able to give the time due to everything. So let's plow right into the draft forestry specifications manual.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is from the last meeting. We looked at the comments that the committee gave us to the forestry specifications manual, and although we still will be bringing a final version back to you for official approval, the biggest concern that we had, as you can see in the minutes, and we followed the minutes as well too, was basically Section 5, our tree protection policies, particularly where it came to the reconstruction and widening of streets and doing sidewalk reconstruction. So the areas in your packet that we included just Section 5 right now. The other parts of the manual we did not have a lot of comments on, other than some minor grammatical things that we took care of, and we'll bring the full thing back to you later. But as you'll see in Section 5.1, there was a Section 5.1.2 added about a philosophy of implementation preservation. The implementation of preservation measures where feasible to preserve public trees in and around construction projects was a philosophy. And then there's the big meat of the document that will be used when we come up to each area as it pertains to the particular tree in that area and the sidewalk that's being reconstructed will be on a case-by-case basis, but what was added here by the consultant in conjunction with our city engineer were some tree preservation measures, 4 different options that could be done in the case where a tree could be saved. And in all cases, as we look at this, it will be looked at on a case-by-case basis to determine if that tree can be saved, what's the quality of the tree, what the condition of it is, how much of the roots need to be cut, if any. You know, if the tree does have to be removed, we'll make that call at that time. But our philosophy, as it says on the previous page, is to try to save as many trees as possible. And here are some options in doing so that could be available: to skirt the concrete around the tree, to jog the sidewalk, to arc the sidewalk, to ramp the sidewalk up over the roots, or to even shave the concrete and lift it just a little bit, so that would have a thicker slab on one end, thinner where it goes over the roots and then thickens back up. So this is the meat of what was added. We wanted to get your feedback and comments on this to see if this satisfied the concerns that we had in this section. And then if so, we'll implement those and bring the whole document forward.
Question from the committee, Mr. Neal.
Yeah, I just have one sort of verbiage question, excuse me, on the second highlighted paragraph on page 10. The last item, ramp sidewalk. It might just be a weird use of words, but it says maintaining minimum ADA sidewalk slope over scaffold roots. Wouldn't that be maintaining the minimum required? Because if the minimum slope would be like zero slope, I guess, and then then it would be having to be within, you know, less than the maximum ADA slope.
Yes.
So that just thought that was a little weird.
Yeah, we can add the word required, or I can work on the wording, so that's what we meant.
Okay.
Yep.
What is the minimum width, ADA width for the sidewalk?
I believe it's 36 inches. That's what a door has to be to get through, but I can double check. Mr. Lemon's talking.
I thought it might be that.
I think
There
it's
might be
36.
somebody in the back of the room that could answer that. Mr. Lindman?
What's the minimum width for an ADA sidewalk? Is it 36 inches? 36.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Answer was 36 for at-home viewers. Any other questions, comments? Before I start on my list, I have issues. One is a comma that I will deal with on separate time. Wondered if somebody could explain on page 9, there's a reference to open trench. Contractors may only open trench with approval from the city forester or city engineer. I'm wondering what that means.
That, I believe, means that they can only completely open up the area around the tree with a backhoe or digger if, when.
Right, like typically when we're digging in laterals, you know, that are 7 feet down,
Okay.
they'll need the forestry permission if they're within that area around the tree that they could damage it.
So if they were doing curb and gutter, they wouldn't need to open trench, but they might if they were digging sewer lines or
Yeah, it
water
would be
lines.
deeper lines. Same thing would be gas, electric lines, those types of things. Really, anything that's below 12 to 18 inches, we would consider an open trench.
Okay. And then, I don't know whose this would be, but I'd never heard the term root plate, and it sounded like it was going to be kind of equivalent to drip line area or something. But then it says if a tree is 10 inches at breast height, then you multiply that times 3, and the root plate is 30 inches. I'm wondering if that's correct.
That is correct, and I believe, I was looking at the full document, I believe that was a term that was,
When I Googled it, it was like the root plate would be what you would see if the tree got blown over. That's what would flip. Is that right?
the tree's root plate is the main support structure of that tree. Where the roots go out even further, there's a certain amount of the tree. Yeah,
But if you
that-
got a 10-inch tree, it's going to be more than 30 inches. That's a big
Yeah.
honking tree.
Well, there's a definition for it, so I was trying to see if it was defined in here.
What I was wondering is if a 10-inch tree would have a 30-foot root plate instead of 30 inches.
No.
No.
Okay.
I guess it should be clarified, is that a 30-inch diameter, or is that a 30-inch radius from the center of the tree? Right. So maybe we should
Yeah,
clarify.
the
Yep,
radius,
we can
but
clarify that.
still, it's 2.5 feet from the trunk.
Right,
It ain't much.
right.
But that's what would tip it in a storm.
So I can verify that, but,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. And then, when it says resident boulevard plantings, it says residents or property owners who wish to plant trees in the city right-of-way are required to submit a free street tree permit application. I'm wondering if we even have that now, or if that's something that's being developed, and I'm wondering if we should make it clear that if a resident or property owner wants to do that, it's their dime, right?
Correct, and we don't currently have an application right now. We have a request that they can fill out. We do have reference to an application, but we don't have one that we've used. But in the appendices of the full manual that you received at the last meeting, and you'll receive again when we do it, there is one that was put together as part of this document that will be then put into play. And
I think it's a very good
Yeah.
step for the city to take, but I think it should be made clear that the property owner is paying for it.
yeah, and we can, if it's not in the document verified, we can make sure we put that comment on this form.
Very good. That's all I've got.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Back to the root plate issue, it seems that the sentence right after the parenthetical reference to the mathematics does say, "This is the distance away from the tree which determines the outer limits of the tree's root plate." So the 10 by 3 equals 30 would be a radius, not a diameter.
Right.
So you'd be 60 inches would be the width of your
So
root
a
plate.
10-inch diameter tree would have a
60-inch
60-inch
radius.
wide
Diameter
Diameter.
plate.
diameter, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm good with it. I just-
So that's 5
It
feet,
still
yeah.
seems really small, because I've been thinking about like drip lines and all that stuff.
Sure.
So, very good. New terminology has been incorporated. Are we loving this? Want to send staff back to implement everything? Do you have any more concerns?
No, I think this is just a really good development, a good step that we need out there. Now, it could be that we look at it in the future and find that we want to refine it somehow, that's fine, but let's get this thing out there, before anybody does any more work, so.
I think that's the goal too, of making it a specifications manual, is it can be updated as practices update and, best management practices become available, and not making it in our ordinance, because that's harder to change. So this will be referenced in our ordinance but a separate document.
There were references in here to things being permitted or like kind of exceptions granted by either the city forester or the director of public works. And as long as there's a very nice working relationship between those two people, I think we're fine. But, Mr. Nutting.
For sake of clarification, thank you, first of all, for this, these changes, which is what we have desired and at one time thought to be in place, but here it's very clear now. Who, for the sake of our help as well as the general public, who is the city forester? And that name is...
Right now, until next Friday, it's Blaine Peterson. And then as of next Friday, he is retiring, so we are in the process of filling that position. So,
Okay.
so we will have somebody new, and we will get that information out as soon as possible.
Very good, thank you, and keep us informed on that.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Anything else? Mr. Gisselman is about ready to make a motion, I think. Somebody might be.
I would move to approve the proposed changes.
Very good. I'm liking it. Second, Mr. Nutting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, hearing none. Happy days. Very good. Delve into discussion and possible action regarding Riverside Park Phase 2 or environmental site assessment. And I would just have a little review, like last time, of where we're at. And we had a very good discussion back in July. We skipped our August. We had planned to talk about this in August, but we didn't have survey information, so we didn't know where the property lines were. But in July, the motion was to bring a recommendation that factors in the concerns that Mr. Killian had brought up in his presentation, and present some priorities based on Mr. Lass's expert opinion, and provide options on the number of borings and what a minimum number of borings might be. We did touch on that minimum number issue in July, and Mr. Lassa said there's no cut and dry formula in terms of how many square feet, how many borings, it's not locked in. But I would like to, one thing I would like to make clear is that in the media, it has been said that I either ordered or directed a revision of the original recommendation that Mr. Lassa came in with for 20 borings. That option is still 100% on the table, and I did not direct or intend to have that recommendation discarded or disregarded. What I asked for was another option that would, and I just used the number 6 for starters, and I asked for a second option, not a revision, to cover, to get us started, and I thought it would be something that the committee should consider rather than going 20. And it's the committee's decision whether to go forward with 20, 14, 8, 6, 3, or whatever, or 0. And we do have a recommendation from our Director of Public Works that kind of harkens back to Mr. Lassa's original recommendation to sit and wait. And I think I've tried to make it clear in the past that my opinion is that won't work because we want more than the surface soil testing accomplished here. I think I'm hearing that pretty clearly from the committee, that we want more than the first 3 inches, that the reason we're talking about borings is that we want to go deeper, and we want to know what's down there and whether we should be concerned about it. So, Mr. Lassa, can you bring us up to speed at your current thinking, and then we can have committee members chime in also.
Thanks for summarizing where we have been. I think also what was brought up at the time of the last meeting was not only where the park boundaries are, but locations of where those borings would be proposed. So using the map that was prepared by the city surveyor with the boundary on there, I did place some locations for proposed borings. And those were based on observations that had been brought forth previously, and some of the historically known things and some of the things that have been brought up by the other groups. So you should have also a map with approximate locations attached. There you go. The concerns seem to be mainly focused on the southern portion of the park. There was not on the map I don't know if it's on your map, but I did put one dot on the north portion, north of Sherman Street, up in the corner up there, for an area close to where that playground is, but the rest of the boring locations were on the south half.
Okay, so when we had 6 samples and you hadn't put any little thumbtacks in the map at that point, but we were at about 27,000, now we're about 32, and is that from the additional 2 locations where you're proposing surface soil testing?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And on the aerial photo, the bright yellow line, is that the property line?
That is the approximate property line for the map that was generated by the city surveyor.
Okay, and it deviates somewhat from the fence?
That appears to be correct.
Okay. So the total number of, now the proposal before us, unless we go back to the 20 or whatever, but the latest one is for 6 borings, and you do 4 tests for each one of those with the surface soil, the one at depth, the volatile organic compounds, the sniff test, and then the groundwater.
There, the 6 borings in red were 2 soil samples from each boring and a groundwater sample. And I think I had it in blue with a red circle. Those were just merely a surface sample. One was close to the culvert location, which would be difficult to access with the machine for a boring. So that was, does that not show up on your? like
We've got it on ours.
Okay.
I think.
Okay,
One here.
so there's one there. That's more of a surface sample that would be collected by hand. The rest of the red would be advanced with with machine, with 2 soil samples and a groundwater sample from each one of those for the parameters that are identified.
And earlier, there was some mention of volatile organic compounds. Is that
That's
no
included.
longer included?
No, that is included.
Okay. So volatile organic compounds, surface soil at depth and groundwater.
Correct.
Very good.
Item number 4 gives you the list of parameters that are being, that would be submitted for analysis.
Okay. And but the groundwater sample, you listed the substances you would test for, and you do not list in that one dioxins, where you are listing it for groundwater. What's the thinking there?
That is more of a concern, that is because of the residual effect hanging on into the soil particles and not really a concern in the groundwater,
Okay. Very good.
more in the surface soils.
Okay. Do you have anything more that you want to share with us before?
No.
Sorry, I kind of jumped right in there. Anything from the committee?
Maybe 1 or 2 questions. Thanks for joining us again. At our July meeting, we had some photos that the group took of an area where pooling, took place at the bottom of the hill, and then there was the residual, gray film on vegetation and whatnot. Is that area represented by one of the red dots
There's kind of three dots.
in a row there?
That are in a row. I'm trying to capture that area, which I believe is the location which you pointed out.
Okay. The red dot to the north, all by itself up there, is that like a runoff, possible runoff from the, that's not from the culvert area, right?
No,
Well, why was that spot chosen?
could you which dot are you referring?
Yeah, that one up to the, right there.
There is the closure of the leaking underground storage tank site for 3M showed migration of groundwater contamination onto the park property in that area. So that was the reason.
Is this the petroleum
Correct.
stuff? Okay. Okay. Is there any of the hot spots, suspected hot spots that we've, talked about in previous meetings that we're missing in this configuration that you know of?
Not to my knowledge. I think we're trying to locate those locations that have been previously discussed.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been going on, I think, longer than it took Eisenhower to plan D-Day, so I'm getting a little confused as to what we've discussed and what we haven't discussed. I thought the initial object of this exercise was to test for soil samples. Where did we get into the groundwater? I don't think anybody's going to come down there and drill a well. So should we be more concerned about the surface testing where people really are than we are about the groundwater contamination, if there is any?
Well, we know there's known groundwater contamination because there are existing monitoring wells on the property. If you walk along the trail on the entrance, there's a couple. As you go down the path from the bike polo area all the way down towards the pavilion, there's several monitoring wells currently from the ongoing investigations that are happening.
Well, if we know there's groundwater contamination, why are we testing for it? If we already know it exists.
We're not sampling in those exact locations. We're we're sampling in other locations where those wells, a distance away from those wells. But, you know, I was asked to put something together that was comprehensive for contamination in the park.
All right. I've always felt we should stick with the soil. That's where I think that's where the major concern of the citizens are, is the soil, not so much the groundwater. We've got 3 basically along the walking path there that maybe should be moved over closer to the area where we are concerned about soil contamination to see what and that's just a comment on my part. I think that groundwater is a non-issue at this point. We're pretty sure there's contamination in the groundwater. We would just be confirming again to ourselves that 2 and 2 is 4. We already know 2 and 2 is 4.
Yeah, but you're also grabbing soil samples in those locations as you go down. So those are all soil samples and then eventually getting to the water table.
Right, but it's going to cost us an additional $5,600 or $6,613 for the groundwater test, when we could possibly just take that money and put it towards more soil testing and get a more comprehensive idea of what the soil contamination level is. Also, are these borings, there's evidently a depression area there, a low spot in the territory there. Are any of these borings going to be in that? Because that's usually where runoff would settle, would be in the lowest portion of the property there.
What I tried to do, there was 3 dots kind of in a row close to where it shows center line of railroad spur. I believe that is the low area of depression area that you're speaking of. If some of those have to be slightly adjusted. It's hard on this scale to know exactly where that depression is. You can't particularly see it, but that
Well,
would be the
I think-
that would be the idea to place them in.
Yeah, I think some of the people from the citizens group could probably show you where those depressions are. Also, one of the things, this yellow line, that's the boundary of, the park is to the east of that, right? And the property that's to the west of it belongs to somebody else, right?
That's
So
how-
right now, as it stands with no fence there, people that are in the park think they're in the park, but actually they're not in the park. They're on 3M's property or whoever owns that property there. Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Mr. G?
Just to the red dots again, the 2 dots, you explained the northern dot close to the river. As with Mr. Smith raised a question with regard to moving the dots closer to the woods, so to speak, was there a specific reason why, those are close to the trail? Or would they be better functioned closer to the woods, closer to the western part of that grassy area?
Depending on what your goal is, if you'd like them to be moved or shifted, that can be done. If we're asking for an assessment of what are the conditions in the park, we tried to spread them out a little bit with putting some of them in the location where the greatest concern is. But if we want to move some to do more in a centralized area, that would be up to the committee if we want to move or adjust numbers.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
It just seems to me reasonable, what you're saying, that if we were concerned that there might be like a plume, let's say, and we might say that, those dots closer to the yellow line are higher concentrations, and there could be pluming from there towards the river, we'd want to get as close to the river as we could to see if there is a plume or to what degree there's been a spread or none at all. So it seems to me that we would want to be pretty near the edge to gauge that. Now, I don't know if we needed one in the middle to kind of have a stepping stone, a halfway point or something. The one to the north, since that was, the spill was a closed DNR statement,
Issue, yeah.
right? Issue. I wonder, do we need that one up there to the north, and could that one be moved to be in a central location here to, again, sort of gauge the possible pluming effect?
that would be up to you. You know, when we were
I
asked
just don't know
to,
if it's a reasonable idea.
you know, if we're moving them all to a certain area, it seems like there's more of a focus on a certain type of contaminant over others. So it was a pretty extensive list of things to try to catch anything that we might see in the park boundaries.
Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's jump ahead. So we have pollutants of any number of the undetermined quantities or identities. What do? We all know that there's issues with something under the ground, but there's green grass on top. What's the opinion do we bring in 1 foot of soil and cover the whole thing and cap it and plant new grass on top of that like we did over at the Holtz-Krause landfill? Or how we abandoned or cleaned up brownfields on the east side of the river, and now we are building parks there as well as housing? And what's the long-term repair if necessary, or do we just leave it alone and use it as we've been using it for 30 to 40 years?
I think your Department of Health people did do some assessments, and if they were to take additional information, they would probably put that into their risk calculations to determine if there was any sort of risk based off of exposure levels. You're correct in the solution when you have contamination is removing it, capping it, covering it, eliminating access or limiting. Those are all solutions when you do have a known problem.
I would expect, based on the things we've done before, and based on the offer of the state toxicologists to advise us further, that we would get whatever results we're going to get from this round of testing, if we do this round of testing, send it to them and say, what do you think here? And go from there. Don't know. Mr. G.
So the bottom line is now that somehow magical, the 6 came up. So I trust that that's the,
That is an option the committee can consider, and I am not shoving it down anybody's throat. It's there, it's possible to consider. There's, it seems to have gained some acceptance, and perhaps we move those dots closer together. What are your thoughts?
before, a question, are there other, besides the contamination that might be against the woods and all that, against that western boundary, what other kinds of, are you led to, through your other types of air pollution, a la other types of contamination that may have fallen into this park? Have you, because some of the eastern red dot, so to speak, might include some other types of pollution that may have happened there? Or have you come across any other, besides that, that western woods area that we're really concerned about, are there other air pollution, a la other types of contamination, things that you may have run across evident in that other parts of the park?
Well, we know from the previous history of the history of the adjacent parcels that there has been impact to the park, to the groundwater, to some soils from a number of substances. So it is, and that's why the list is extensive with pentachlorophenol and VOCs and dioxins, because these are all things that have been impacts to the park supposedly from adjacent activities. Some of it possibly from stormwater, some of it from aerial deposition, some of it from getting into groundwater and traveling towards the river underground.
Okay, thank you.
Another layman's question. A couple of months ago, my understanding was that when you were going to do the testing of the soil at depth, what I thought you were going to do is take a couple feet of soil, put it in a bowl, stir it up, take a sample of an average for that, and then way you'd be, relatively sure of getting, whatever was in that distance, those the maximum, minimum depths that you sampled from. But more lately, the most recent thing was, no, you'd pick a depth.
Correct. What you're
And
referring
so-
to is a composite sample?
Okay, and that
Instead of
makes
just-
perfect sense to me, but when you're picking a depth, could you explain, apparently that's better?
Well, there are certain, some of the contaminants that we've described have been maybe surficially deposited by aerial deposition, so then you're going to want to be closer to the surface. We would be screening with a device for volatile organic compounds, so if you do have a soil sample at a depth that shows some readings, maybe that's an interval that you would want to sample because you're showing something is detecting in your field screenings. But you are making visual observations, you are doing some readings with a photoionization detector to see if there's any volatiles that are in that soil sample, and making a decision. Oftentimes, maybe just above the groundwater table is where you'll see contaminant sometimes migrate down to, but some of them, they all behave differently.
So you say there's a 6-foot core typical that you're going to pull up?
Probably be a 4-foot section would be typical.
Okay, so you're going to pull 4 feet up, and do you put the sniffer on, and wherever the sniffer stops,
You're
that's where you take your soil?
No, you're grabbing intervals, bagging that sample, and sniffing that sample.
Okay, and so if you bagged samples from 3 feet and 5 feet, and the 5-footer sent the needle higher, that's the one you would send for the full range of tests?
Yes.
Okay,
I-
so
you know,
there's,
I think what we're talking about here is one sample that is close to the surface, within
Yep.
inches, and then one at depth, which would just, as you described, if we're seeing some staining or seeing readings, then that would be the interval that you would probably collect a sample for, and submit that to the lab.
okay, and that's the, kind of the state-of-the-art for people who do this sort of thing? That's the way this is done?
Yes, for certain parameters. You can't sniff metals, you can't sniff certain things, but there are some parameters that you can do some field screening for.
Okay, but we want to do this once and do it right, so we don't want to, in 3 months, say, oh, rats, we should have tested, instead of at 4 feet, should have tested at 5 feet. So, yeah, we want to get it right, so. Comments? Mr. Nutting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In paragraph 5 of the agenda summary, one of the lines says, "The city engineering staff has also included a memo for the committee's review." Could I have a member of the city's engineering staff come up and remind us what that memo was for the committee's review? Thank you.
Did you read it in your packet?
I wasn't locating it at the moment, but I think Mr.
Okay, yeah, I downloaded
has-
my packet early, and it was added, I think, at 5 o'clock Friday or something like that, so I just found out it was there today.
Okay.
It was part of the original.
It's here.
Was it?
It's the
I
first
didn't
page
see it.
before the report.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Lindman, if you could.
Yeah, so I tried to outline kind of, at least the most recent conversations that we've had with this. I mean, there's been multiple revisions on the Phase 2. We did this spring move forward with the Phase 1. We received that. We did get the recommendations from, REI, who had prepared that. We do know Wausau is performing dioxin tests, I believe 36 samples for those tests. Ideally, I mean, from our standpoint, we would like to see those results. Whatever results that they get, they're going to go back to the DNR, and the DNR will determine if they have to do additional testing and where that testing should be. We would be part of those conversations as well, you know, with Matt Thompson as well as TRC and Wausau as well. And so, you know, if they are finding things in the soils, and if there are higher levels of dioxins, we're certainly not opposed to testing, but, you know, we would like that testing to be done by the people responsible. You know, if the committee wants to move forward with subsurface testing, that is certainly, you know, your prerogative, but we'd really like to see not only the test results from Wausau, but also how the DNR responds to those and be part of those conversations on any future testing that they're going to require.
So do you have this question may have been asked before, but do we have a time when those tests will be available to us so that we can make a determination if we need to do additional testing on the city's expense?
Yeah, I think that they've completed those testings or are in the process of completing that testing. The dioxin tests, I think, take about a month to come back. That's at least my experience with it. I don't know when I'm going to see those results or when the DNR will receive those. I don't have a timeline on that yet, but I would guess it's going to be this fall.
Okay.
And then they'll have a review period on those tests and determine what additional testing will be required of Wausau for that. So, you know, in talking with Matt Thompson with the DNR, those are the conversations that the city wants to be a part of as well as we move forward on this. And that's information that we want out there as well. You know, what sort of accountability is Wausau taking on, and what are they going to be forced to do moving forward? So, you know, not only just on city property, but, you know, the property in the area. I mean, they're responsible for this, they did this, and we just want to make sure they're held accountable for it.
I can fill in a little bit on the timeline, and I think we mentioned this at a previous meeting, but Matt Thompson told me that the results from the testing, from the analysis, are going to be in Wausau's hands, or their consultants, this month, September, and they will be handed over to the DNR in September, and the DNR is going to require 60 days, give or take, to formulate some kind of a response or reaction to those results. So we'd be talking November for that. And I did, as a result of a question brought up, I think perhaps by Citizens for Clean Wausau, I'm not sure, but somebody at our last meeting asked if we knew, and maybe Mr. Killian might know this off the top of his head, actually, but there was some uncertainty as to what the surface soil testing was going to analyze for, that Wausau was doing. And I didn't know the answer to that, so I remembered it last week, and about midweek I shot an email to Mr. Thompson and asked him what substances they were going to be testing for, and he was on vacation, and I haven't heard back from him yet, so I'm not sure what that is. Mr. Mayor, you're moving toward the microphone. Do you have a comment? Sure. Stick around, Eric.
Wausau's doing this testing. Do we know where these tests are being conducted? I mean, you know, what, you know, are they one here? Are they close to what we're looking for here, or where are they testing at?
No, there's only one that's proposed in Riverside Park. The rest are basically from their site. It would be to the northwest and the southeast of the majority of them. They also have some outlier ones, kind of to the west and to the east, you know, in our right-of-way. And there's 36 is what's proposed so far, and they're just surface soils. As far as I know, they're just testing dioxins, but they could be testing for more. I don't know all of the results.
Well, then if we're concerned about the status of Riverside Park and there's only one test that Waleco is performing in Riverside Park, it would seem to beg that since we're testing all of ours in Riverside Park, that there's really no reason for us to delay it, is it? Because they're not going to be testing where we're testing.
Well, not right now, they're not proposed to, but if they find stuff, the DNR is likely going to require them to do additional testing, which, so if they are required to do additional testing on the next round, and it is going to be in Riverside Park, then,
You can assure us of that, that would we have some say as to where we want them tested, or is that up to them? In
well,
Riverside Park?
ultimately, it's up to them, but, I'm a conversation at the table, pushing for testing and trying to keep the best interest of the city at the forefront as well, so.
Okay.
Mr. Killian, can you fill us in on anything?
Good evening, Tom Killian, 133 East Thomas Street, and also a volunteer for Citizens for a Clean Wausau. I do have some additional questions and comments I could reserve until after the mayor speaks, if that would be preferable. But to your question, Mr. Peckham, about what contaminants would be tested for in the Waleco air deposition study, the latest, when I had addressed this with Mr. Thompson, shortly after that process began with Waleco, he had conveyed to me, unless I was mistaken, that it would only be dioxins and furans that Waleco would be testing for in this air deposition study. And I think a good question and answer had just come up, and that was, how many samples will Waleco be doing in Riverside Park? And my understanding as well is that it would only be one sample. Now, I can ask Mr. Lindman or Mr. Lassa. I think I have a pretty good idea myself, but let's ask, just to, I guess, make it more official. Mr. Lindman, do you know roughly how large of an area Riverside Park is, acreage-wise? Okay, if my memory's not failing me, it would be 5.06 acres. Okay, so when we look at statistical significance in Waleco's air deposition study, and that, to give the city a heads up so it doesn't hang its hat on that, that's going to be very critically addressed and taken apart on the merits. And what we just learned is that Riverside Park is just over 5 acres, and Waleco would have us believe that one sample in Riverside Park would have some statistical significance. Now, many of us are not mathematicians, but I think we can conclude immediately that it will not, all right? So if someone spills pizza somewhere in this room, and we don't know where it is, and Mr. Lindman does one test for pizza sauce in the corner of that room, is that what we consider a thorough investigation? Obviously not. So I do have some additional comments and questions, but I'll reserve those and let the mayor speak if he desires, if that pleases the chair.
Very good.
Thank you.
Would you like to have Mr. Lindman address your concerns first, or Mr. Lassen?
Well, would you care to speak?
I'll cut away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, I had come up to respond to your question, Mr. Peckham, so I'd kind of like to reserve my time for questions and comments I had. So when we look at the map, would it be possible, Ms. Polly, to bring that up, or Mr. Peckham, the map of the proposed borings?
She's on it.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Had the wrong person there.
She's the control person.
Okay. So these 3 proposed samples near the forest edge, those look very appropriate from our perspective as a group, because we know historically that's based on fact where there's been runoff. It's just east of the culvert. Now, these 3 samples that are to the east there, now, our attitude, and of course there are fiscal concerns, but is the more tests, the better. So we're not averse to seeing those locations tested, even if it's just to clear that area for the River's Edge trail development, right? You guys can test it. Hopefully it's clean. You can put out a press release, say it's clean, and that's taken care of. But what we do not want to see is 50% of an already reduced budget and now a very weakened soil plan, which is so weak that one thing I can speak for as a spokesperson for our group, that in its current state, this would not be recognized as sufficient, acceptable, or legitimate as a testing plan. So with those three there, let's just take those for example. Now, the one in the southeast corner, based on a DNR map of runoff data that was in our presentation here in July, even that point would not be relevant to runoff because the DNR map actually shows exactly where the runoff goes. And where the runoff goes is southeast of that point. So even that would not be an appropriate spot based on fact. And we'd like to keep this to fact and no more speculation. And in terms of depth and quantity of borings, so Mr. Smith had brought up kind of a fiscal component with the groundwater. That's $6,600 spent on groundwater testing, and this was essentially a soil study plan. It was supposed to be. That's 20% of the budget right there lost for groundwater testing. Now, another 17% of this budget goes to project management and a report from REI. So right there, you've already cut out 37% of the budget, which was intended for soil borings, and we're only left with 3 possible relevant samples near that forest area. Also, I had asked Mr. Lindman when we had the special meeting at the park if he knew what depth the exceedances had been found in that 2006 study that this was based on. I don't believe he did, but I do know that depth, and it was 6 to 8 inches, right?
Mr. Killian, let me stop you for 1 second. I want to remind the committee that at that special meeting in July, you were asked specifically by Mr. Smith to come forward at our last meeting and provide a recommendation of where the samples should be to make your group satisfied. So right now I'm hearing, and I'm coming into this on the tail end. I haven't been involved for many years, but you're now picking apart. So we have a really busy night tonight. There's another meeting, so I want to remind the committee, and that's why I'm stopping this right now at this point, is because you were asked at that meeting to provide exactly where you wanted the samples to be. You did not do that, and so now you're standing up here picking apart a presentation that was given by REI to this committee for these sample location based on what they know in their professional opinion. So I guess I would ask the committee to take a step back here, and before we proceed with picking apart the proposal that you asked for and you're spending money on from REI, is to, if this is how it's going to go every meeting, that this spot's not good enough, or this spot's not good enough, and this spot, then go back to your original request that we had in July from Mr. Smith of the group to ask, what is going to make the group satisfied? Because that is what your goal is to test Riverside Park, to make sure that it is safe for our users to go in, to satisfy the Clean Water Citizens Group. And so right now I am listening to this, and you are picking apart the report. So I asked you, as an organization, to do what Mr. Smith asked you to do and give us exactly where you would like these samples to be taken and at what depth and what you want them tested for, and that's what the committee should react to. And if I'm out of bounds, I apologize, but I feel like this has gone around and round and round for a number of meetings, and now we have come to another proposal, and Mr. Killian is picking it apart. So I think that's what you need. If you're going to satisfy the group and test the park to make sure we want to keep it open for our citizens, we need to know what exactly will make the group happy to determine what the safety of that is.
I don't know if that's possible. I just don't know if that's possible to make this group happy. And I'm going to go right on the record and say that, because this is constant concern that, quite frankly, I don't think the residents of this whole city of Wausau want to fund all of these borings when the park has been perfectly well, hardly used, but this area is hardly used and could easily just be fenced off. But I'm frankly growing very fatigued of this constant hashing over something. We either will do something, but finance is really going to draw the conclusion. Finance is going to one who's going to say whether they'll spend the money and do this or not. That's really where it comes down to.
Mr. Chair?
Well, hang on a
since-
minute. I would like to keep this rolling. And I do agree that, everybody has a point here. I'm willing to hear you out, Mr. Killian, and I trust that the committee would take his comments into consideration as we,
Wrap it up in 3 minutes.
as we make the decision. Yes, we're going to move along. But I do think, I think the committee is in full knowledge of the fact that we need to make this decision to our own satisfaction and to the satisfaction of the city council, and we don't need to make it, we don't need to say, well, we need to do more for the Citizens for Clean Wausau. We need to do more until we are confident that we've done the right thing. And Mr. Killian, go
I
ahead.
agree with that last sentiment, Mr. Peckham, and this is not for Citizens for a Clean Wausau. This is for citizens of Wausau. And so, thank you, we agree on that. And because I was castigated and there were some seemingly ad hominem attacks here, I would like to just respond to Ms. Polly's comment, hopefully to her satisfaction. We were invited by Mr. Smith to provide a presentation, and we did provide a very thorough presentation, and it is available on our website, cleanwausau.com. And as you will see as a council and as a media and as the public, is that these were addressed, that we presented 3 zones of testing. We presented the depth we recommended at testing. We even went so far as to recommend the specific EPA method of dioxin testing. So this was done in great detail, and I know it was in-depth, so perhaps you may have missed some of those things, Ms. Pauley. But
Mr. Killian, I asked the city staff, and I hope the mayor will back me, you have stand up here and you completely downgrade staff on these things. I've seen the report, I have the PowerPoint right here, and we can bring it out and we can do that. And yes, you give 3 spots, but they're not exact spots. They're spots that Mr. Lassa took when he put this together, and he went exactly off of what you recommended. And now you're still standing and saying that that's not good enough. So before you completely keep downgrading staff and trying to call out myself or Mr. Lindman, you need to stick to the point that you're trying to make as to why is this important? Why is this important to test this park, and where exactly should it be tested? And why are these not acceptable now when they're based off of the PowerPoint that you gave?
I don't
Please
think
stick to
we
that.
put any borings next to the trail.
Can
We
you
have-
wrap up in 1 minute?
Yes, sir. So as our presentation had showed, and as we've said for quite some time now, that the area near the edge of the forest on the western edge of the park, as we know from the culvert location and the video that's on our website, that was an area of runoff. And we also know that when Century Insurance was sued using dioxin tests over concerns of cancer in the neighborhood, those were taken at the base of the A horizon with an EPA method that is in our presentation, and we would be happy to provide more detail. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Name and address, you've got 3 minutes.
Anybody else want to come forward? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. I want to reiterate some things that Eric said, and let's use a little common sense and especially a little fiscal sense coming up on this. 1, I really believe we need to wait until we get the report back from Alico and then the DNR recommendation, which will be coming in November. That'll be sliding over into next spring. From a fiscal, that's using common sense. We know if there's something there, fine. The city has never been adverse as far as doing testing. I'm all for, and I've shown it before in different spots on Thomas Street. Folks can go take their testing wherever they want. I could care less, show it, make it open and transparent. From a fiscal sense, though, the money that is involved in this, I do not have it right now for this year. And I'm thinking if we wait a couple of months, going into the spring of next year, we can make our decision here in December or January or whatever, when we have a better idea as far as the budget going into fiscal 2020. If it is decided that we have to do the testing, I'm going to have money set aside for that, depending on how many borings or whatever you want to do. I too, and this has been shown, and I fully support staff, because I've got the best staff in the world, and the city is very lucky to have their expertise. And nobody's here to try to mislead anybody or anything like that. We too want to find out what's happening. But honestly, I don't have the money for it right now. Number two, if it is somebody else's fault, which it is, the city did not cause this situation. This is on Waleco, and the DNR make that determination, then why shouldn't Waleco have to pay for that? It shouldn't be on the city. But if it is determined that we have to do some type of testing, which I am not opposed to if I've got the money, and we could do the borings or sample testing wherever anybody wants, but it's just ongoing and ongoing. If it's not one thing, it's another. And we want to hear what people have to say in the citizens group. You know, and this was said to me that this is something else that got inherited, but we've at least addressed it, which hasn't been done before. But it's getting to a point where, you know, let's use some common sense. If there is something there, fine, we will deal with it. We need to wait and find out what's happening to get a better idea of everything, including the cost. Thank you for listening.
Okay, I just had a couple of quick thoughts spinning off of that, and it occurred to me today that you could take Alderman Smith's line of thinking that if the groundwater is 5 or 6 feet down in the soil and we're not going to be drinking it, why are we testing it? So if you also, if you took that and applied it to the soil testing, if we're not allowing people to go out there with shovels and dig holes, and most people throw a Frisbee around or walk through or, you know, look at birds or gaze at the river, then why are we testing it? You could use that and say, okay, let's just wait, you know, or only do surface soil testing. I'm not sure I adhere to that, but it's a possible line of reasoning. In terms of not having the money right now, I think the committee's situation should be that we ask the Finance Committee and the council for the money to do what we think is right. And if it takes 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months to make that happen, that's reality. I mean, we aren't going to pass this and figure that the testing is going to start next week. We're, you know, we may say today we want the $32,000 worth of testing, put our request on file and pay for it when you get it. So I think the fact that the money, you know, is not sitting in an account somewhere waiting to be spent is not our necessarily needs to prohibit us from stating our wishes. I would entertain a motion at this point.
I've got,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to say something else.
Very good.
Was on that. I was to a finance meeting the other night, and we were going over our finances, and I understand we have such a thing as called a contingency fund. According to our chief financial officer, we've got tons of money in the contingency fund. So, I mean, we're not looking at $3 million here to do testing. However, I would lean towards finding out what, well, WECO's going to do, but I'm concerned that WECO's taking one sample in the park. We're not concerned about the other places they're testing. We're talking about Riverside Park. And there's no way we're going to be satisfied if they come back and say, oh, yeah, we took one sample over here and we didn't find anything. That doesn't make any sense. We want more testing in that park. Now, I think that we shouldn't test for groundwater. Like I said, nobody's going to dig a well down there. And I'm wondering why we're even going 4 feet down. People don't go down there and dig foxholes. I'm concerned about what people are walking on and maybe what's 2 inches under the soil. So I don't think, and I'm not sure on this, I don't think once pollution migrates 4 feet down, it comes back up again. I don't see how that could happen. So if we find that it's polluted 4 feet down, that's maybe something we should deal with in the future, but it's certainly not going to infect anybody or affect anybody walking across it or throwing a Frisbee around on it. And I think this should be settled. I know this has gone on, but I think some of the reasons it's gone on is sides with the city. We've been dragging our feet on this too, I believe. And I think that we do need to do something, but I will put a challenge to Mr. Killian. Killian, you see the map up here? You give us a map and show us where we're supposed to dig holes. You bring that to the next meeting of this committee, and we'll look at it. And then we'll know. That way, we can't say anymore that you're being wishy-washy. If you give us where you want us to bore, and we will certainly take a long, hard look at that. Thank you.
Quickly,
Yes, sir. Mr. Smith, we will expedite that, and you will have it on Friday, sir. Thank you.
and that request should not impede us from acting today if we so choose. Mr. Gisselman?
So I'll make the motion to proceed then with the $32,639 for and engage REI for the testing of Riverside Park. And I think with regard to your comments, I think it's going to take a while, but at least we start the process today. I think it's important that we start to move on, and it may take a while before we find the money. It has to be approved up to the city council. So at this point in time, I may be arguing with whether it's 6 or 20 or whatever it was, or the amount of money, but at least at this point in time, I think we should start the process and start to move on.
Yeah,
Did
but
your
if we approve
motion-
this amount, we're stuck with those borings. What if we decide we want more borings?
Okay, well, we
Well-
ain't done yet. Mr. Gisselman, is your motion to do the borings in the locations proposed?
Well, I think that my motion does not include exactly where those borings are going to be, but I feel strongly that we should be initiating the process and at least know that REI will be working with this committee and city staff to, or with regard to the potential sites of those borings. At this point in time, taking Mr. Smith, I'm not so concerned about the exact site of the borings. I want the process to get done, and I want to move on so that we at least have some kind of a standard to move forward to finance as well as the city council.
Okay, there is almost a motion on the table. Is there a
I
second?
think it wasn't
Well-
almost, sir.
Let's have a second for it. Is there one? Second for that motion? Going once? Going twice? That motion dies. Is there, Mr. Weems, maybe we can
Yeah.
squeeze you in here?
I think that...
Tell us that you're Christopher Weems and where you live.
Yeah, that's who I am. I want to make a comment. The city of Washington should be stuck with that 32,000. Oh, address, sorry. 500 Grand Avenue.
Thank you, sir.
The city of Wausau shouldn't be stuck with that $32,000. They want it tested, they should pay for it out of their own pocket. That's not fair to the city. Just saying.
Thank you. Is there another motion?
I would make a motion to review this again at our next meeting with said input to come from the citizens group. And I would like to alter the methodology to eliminate the groundwater and perhaps even the 4-foot and stick more to what I would describe as disturbable depths of dirt, which I think is the more clear and present concern with regards to the park itself. So however deep that is, 6 inches, 8 inches, whatever, but I would table this until our next meeting and then come up with a more, what I would consider relevant approach to testing and send that, hopefully, to finance for their consideration.
So we're going to delay action for 1 month, and at that, in a month, we're going to consider whether we want to do the at-depth testing, or you want to jettison that right now?
Well, I would like it to be part of an acceptable motion. I just
Okay.
don't think it's not what we're really
Okay, so the
here to be
motion is to
considering.
delay for a month, but when we come back, consider surface soil testing, period?
It's what I would consider disturbable, soil.
Very good. Is there a second to that one? Mr. Smith?
Can I have a question?
You certainly can.
Because then we're asking REI again, it's just, I don't know, Mr. Lassa, how you react to that, but do you have a reaction to that motion to table? I guess maybe that's what I need to know.
Pardon?
What reaction would they
As
have?
he's on his way up here, and we do need to be cognizant that we don't have any money to pay this man.
Well, exactly right, and
But
I'm
He
concerned that
he
we're
wouldn't have to
asking
do
him
any
again
work
to
between now and then.
define
If he came
his
back
work.
in here and we said, okay, we want to squeeze, or maybe add 3 dots to that map, or squeeze the ones that we have, we could just direct that next time and say, and ditch those other ones, go. So I don't know if we need any more work out of him between now and then, but Mr. Lassa, you want to react to Mr. Gisselman?
What was the question again? Now that
Oh, well, just if you're, because there was some qualifications by Mr. Neal with regard to exactly what we should be doing within the next month with regard to this table motion. And I just want to know how you are reacting to that, because, well, I just don't want in any way to diminish the results of this or to compromise the results. I want to make sure that what's done is the complete and best of your ability to be doing something and testing for those, testing the park. And I yield to your expertise.
Well, we're going to collect the samples. We're going to send them to a state-certified laboratory that's independent. They're going to do the analysis and provide the results. So, if you look at the proposal, there's a substantial amount of money in the testing of all those parameters. And what activity in the park is going to disturb 8 inches, 10 inches? There is a lawn area, so, that is up to your discretion as to, okay, do we want to not test deeper? But what we originally asked for was give us an extensive testing of the park, soil and groundwater, and so that's where we went down that path, for a long list of parameters that were brought forth by the citizens.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lassa. Any other comments from the committee before we vote on Mr. Neal's motion?
What was your motion again?
Pardon?
Clarity.
To reiterate, I guess, as much as I can, my motion is to table until our next meeting, at which time we will re-look at the map as it reflects the best thoughts of the citizens group, remaining within this general estimate as a maximum. And I'm also asking that we remove the groundwater testing as irrelevant to our purpose, and looking at the need for a 4-foot or whatever depth testing, again, is maybe irrelevant to our purpose, and have our testing stick to what I guess describe as disturbable surface dirt to a reasonable depth, whatever that might be, 6 inches, 8 inches. Not the most detailed or easy to understand motion, but it's the kind of thing I would like to then clarify at our next meeting,
Yeah.
and then send that with our recommendation to finance.
My sense of it is that you're saying that those are the things we should consider and we're not locking into them today.
Right.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
So
from-
what are we messaging out to REI, exactly what we want to do? Nothing.
Sit tight.
Nothing.
Well, but at the next meeting, we will talk about something or another, and how do we talk about something if we don't have REI's expertise here to talk about it? Right? Because then it's another month down the chute.
We will have staff available, though.
So we're not asking Mr. Lassa to come back at our next meeting, but we will rely on staff input, right?
Seems reasonable to me.
And we may
Okay.
have some report yet from testing that is being accomplished by Wausau too, that we may be able to digest.
Now, in October, we won't.
We'll be closer.
Yeah. Okay. All those in favor of Mr. Neal's motion? No questions on it, right? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none? You're going to oppose it? Very good. I would say that would be a 4-to-1 margin, and thank you very much. We move slowly but surely toward the ultimate goal. Okay, Ms. Powley can talk to us about 2020 budget, and we have 27 minutes.
Okay, I think we can get.
We're
through
golden.
this. All right, let me find it. Okay, well, we've been working on our 2020 budget for both the city and the county. They kind of go hand in hand, especially as we're looking at our wages and staffing costs. We did a budget summary in your agenda summary, and Mr. Patridge from our department, who does our budget and put this together, is here to answer any questions that you might have. But looking at it in a brief overview, our expense budget there is an increase this year, and I'll go over why there is an increase. But it includes a 2% wage increase for all our full-time and seasonal wages. There was some, at the last county board meeting, there was an increase in the seasonal wage amounts for our staffing by 50% for some positions, not all, but for some. We have added a recreation intern that works this year. Our intern worked, all of their efforts were pretty much on city projects with the pool free days, the pool special events, and promotion of those. And then there are some wage and salaries that we're backfilling from retirements this year. So we had some increases. We also have some decreases, knowing that those wages were at the high end of their salary. And if we hire those back, we're hiring more at the midpoint. So it's not a 100% add to the budget. There is some give and take in there. We had some supplemental costs that were approved for 2019 or for 2018 and for 2019 that were our seasonal staffing costs, labor, contracted services, utilities, and operating supplies specifically for the River Life project north of Wow. Those have now been included into the general operating budget. So in the last 2 years, they were 50% one year, 50% the next year. They are now fully in our budget. And then we included the second year of the Emerald Ash Borer treatment that was approved last year. The first year was approved as a supplemental. It's a 2-year cycle for those that increases. So that increased our contractual services by $32,000. And then I talked about the River Life. That's the .5 FTE was added to that as part of our tourism-related projects that we do, but the River Life is part of that as well. And the last year, that labor was funded through room tax. Since 2017, that's something our finance director may comment on if they want to pull that back out of our budget and fund it out of room tax, or right now we kept it in our general operating budget. So other increases that we have is we've added funding for our CSOs officers that are at our Woodchucks game, typically that hadn't been budgeted for, and we were just paying for it out of whatever we had left over in the budget, but we wanted to include that as a true cost this year. We also had some work done in front of Party Street. The city had some curb and gutter repair, and that facility is being assessed, like all residents, for street work that wasn't budgeted for last year, but now we know it's about $3,200 or $3,100 each year. We have to pay it still in 2020, 2021, and 2022. It's a 5-year assessment. We had a request this year to extend our flower baskets down 3rd Street to the end of the Y now. It ends right, I don't know my streets, but it ends at this street
Grant.
on 3rd Street. So we've been asked to extend it 2 more blocks. That's additional $2,000. And then a huge increase that you'll see is the chemicals to treat the River Life fountain. Right now, it's required that we treat that water because it has to be treated before it goes into the river, and it has pucks that go in these wands that you pull out. And it's extremely expensive. So we are doing a pretty extensive research to see how we can decrease this cost, use different chemical to do that, working with our water department, if there's a way to extend the line that it goes through before it gets to the river. But right now, with the cost of those chemicals and what has being used and what's being spec'd for that, it's an increase to our budget of $47,000. Mr. Nutting?
Could you elaborate on what that, I was reading that, I was wondering if that was referring to the water that was emitting out, are we talking about those arcing
Correct.
jets?
We are,
Is
correct.
that just tap water coming out of there, correct?
It is, it's regular water
It's-
that's coming out, but in order, once it hits people, because it's kind of a splash pad, it needs to be treated before it goes back. The chlorine has to be taken back out before it goes back into the river. So just like our water treatment plant, as your water goes out of your house, it has to be treated before it goes down into the river, this also has to be treated. So it's,
What?
We're not treating the 400 block
Are we
fountain water.
treating it
That has
because
a longer
people have
distance.
touched it?
Oh, okay.
Or,
it's the chlorine, I believe, that you have to take the chlorine back out, because it's chlorinated as it comes out of your tap, as it goes back to be dispersed, and Mr. Limon left, he can explain this way better than I can. It has to be treated before it's let back into the river. So that can be by a number of reasons. One can be chemically treated, like this is, because it's so close to the river and the run of the piping that needs to go through isn't long enough to take that chlorine out. There's other areas like the 400 block, I believe that the piping is long enough before it gets to that treatment facility where that chlorine breaks down by the time it gets there, and there is no need to treat that.
so is the drains for that fountain going directly into the river there?
Pretty close, yeah. There is a linear kind of arc that goes through. So these pucks that we have are directly right next to the water. The water goes back into the drains, hit these pucks, and then it's good to go out to the river. I don't know exactly how long that linear footage is of that system, but I can get that to you. I believe it's not long enough.
Tap water is, I would think that the water out of the pools is highly chlorinated as opposed to our city tap water.
But we have to dechlorinate that as well before we drain it. So we turn off the pumps, we turn off the chlorine. That all has to be dechlorinated before it gets dispersed into the river.
I don't know, I think I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that we've got to treat that drain water before it can go into the river, and then,
It has to do with the chlorine. But we are trying to, this is what was spec'd for it. Like I said, we're trying to find a different, right, these are pucks, and there isn't a lot of options.
what is a
so
puck?
It's
I'm
exactly what, it's
thinking
like a
of-
hockey puck.
Yes.
And you have a long wand that they get stacked in.
Okay, so this is
Yeah,
like a
and-
filter, the water's
Yes.
going through a,
It's just like that.
okay,
And we go through about a bucket of pucks every 2 to 3 days, and a bucket is $600 a bucket. So that's why these costs are so high right now. So we are looking at alternate ways, but until we find that, this is what's been spec'd for that park, and we have to plan to pay for it.
why can't we just spread it on the grass that's along the river's edge there, and along, that's all wild, weedy?
I think we should ask staff to explore options to lower that cost.
And we are.
Allow the lady to move along. We've got 18 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. And then the next item that for increase in the budget, and this is something that the committee can discuss, we have a set amount for street trees that we buy each year. Really, what our city forester has been doing is spending that amount is buying as many trees as possible with that amount. But the tree sizes that we've been planting are smaller tree sizes. It's been a request, it's part of the forestry specification manual that we're putting together, that we start planting a little bit larger trees. They can be still bare root trees or containerized trees, but we at least want a 1.5 to 2 inch size tree. So we put an amount in here to increase the amount for street tree replacement so that we can purchase bigger trees. However, if we stick with the budget that we had, we can still purchase bigger trees, we just purchase less of them. So it's it's really trying to get that quantity up. And then the big amount, which Dave can maybe speak to a little bit more if there's questions, is we had right now, the anticipated insurance premiums have gone up significantly to a tune of the city's share of $38,000. So that is a very big increase from our insurance carrier for all of the different insurances that we have to maintain. So that's expenditures. Any questions, more questions on that?
What do we look like compared to last year? You got,
Dave has yep, he can.
is this a doable thing you're proposing here?
Yep, so if you compare the budget that our staff put together for 2020 for the City Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department, expenditures are 9% above the 2019 expenditures, and that includes 1,000s through the 5,000. So personal services, contracted services, materials and supplies, and insurances, and fixed costs. So expenditures are up 9%. Just real quickly here, revenues are up 2%. So our overall levy is up 9.82%, comparing our 2020 budget we put together compared to our 2019 modified budget.
But as we mentioned, so when I just went through the expenditure increase, the big expenditures are the insurance of the $38,000. We did increase the tree size. That can be discussed whether or not we want to increase that budget. It's just how many trees we would purchase each year. And then the supplementals. So we had $30,000 for River Life, which became part of the general operating now after it's been opened. The Emerald Ash Borer of the $32,000, and then that halftime position. Like I said, that had been funded through room tax for the last couple of years. That could continue if our finance director would like it to continue to be funded through room tax. That could be, we feel it's a general operating and has now been in the works since 2017. It's a regular position to take care of the downtown area, the River Life, in addition to other, it's a tourism-related position, so it's not necessarily only River Life, but it was designed and approved as a supplemental back in 2017. It should be part of our general operating. So those are, the numbers for our increases are right there in that paragraph.
So is this committee being asked today to approve a recommended requested budget that would be 9.82% more on the tax levy? Or does that come at another meeting?
No, that's what we are asking you to move it forward. It still has to go through it's been submitted to finance. That had to be submitted last week. And then it will come to the full council as part of the overall general budget. And that's where Mary Ann could decide to take that 0.5 position when she's working all of her numbers from all of the different departments to try to make the overall city budget balance. She could take that 50,000 out, still fund it through room tax. That would decrease our overall amount. We are just including everything that has been approved as supplemental to be operational for our department. It now needs, it's been approved. It's an operation that we have been directed to move forward with. So how it's funded would be her recommendation to you. We are funding it as part of our general operating budget because that's where it would fit.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we would take these recommendations and move them forward to the next step for approval.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
It says here, other increases include adding CSO officers to the budget for monitoring Wisconsin woodchucks game. Why are we providing security for a private business? Woodchucks are a private business, they're a for-profit business. I mean, if you held a concert over there, would we provide CSO officers for that?
I don't know the history of the CSO officers. It's been a requirement. I don't know. Who do you?
Yeah, I am not real versed on that either. I know it came about a couple of years ago through our assistant park director who works closely with Ryan, the Woodchucks manager, and
Evidently, a little too closely.
Yeah,
We're providing security for free.
yep, but I'm not able to provide what the,
Now, I have a problem with that. I think that if they want security, they should get their own, they can get the rent-a-cops out of the mall for all I care, but I don't think we should have our CSOs tied up over there. They could be downtown doing other things.
We do, we do charge the woodchucks fees, and there is an increase each year there, that's included in there for the athletic park gate receipts, it increases. So the fees that we take in as revenue, offset some of our costs there. I think part of it was some of the issues we were having with how the spectators were treating the facility, and that was a safety net. But I can look into that further as to why we need them there. I'll talk with Mr.
I'd like that
McDonald.
looked into.
Yep.
But the CSOs have been there for many baseball seasons already, so I trust somebody's been paying for them,
Yeah.
either the woodchucks or the police department through the city or something, so there
Well,
evidently is some kind of a change going on.
If the police department's paying for it, in other words, the taxpayers are paying for it.
Well, I'm just saying,
Well, we're
I'm
paying
ju-
for it out of our general budget. We just hadn't budgeted for it specifically before that $1,200. So it was being paid for out of our budget with whatever underspend that we hadn't spent.
Well, but
And
you're
we've
showing an increase.
We're adding it to the budget as an actual expense. We didn't have it in there as a line item expense in the.
Well, if we're adding it to the budget, and the budget gets approved and paid for by the taxpayers are then paying for it. Is that
And they
not
already
right?
were
We've
paying
been
for
paying
it.
for it.
Yep.
What?
They already were paying for it. We just didn't specifically call it
Right,
out in our line item.
and that's my problem. Why are we paying for it?
Let's have her
find out, yep.
respond to that. She offered to
Yep.
bring us a response at our next meeting.
Okay, that'd be great.
Very good. Any other discussion on Mr. Nutting's motion to send this budget on its way as is? Hearing none, all those in favor?
We need a
Mr.
second.
Oh,
don't you need a second?
We need a second.
Mr. Neal
Second.
provided the second. Thank you very much. Keep the guy honest. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? 1. Thank you. Mr. Smith opposes, 4-1. Motion passes. Thank you. See where that goes. Educational items?
Oh, I got one other one. With that, the fee directive.
Oh, fee directives, okay.
This one would be fairly short.
10 minutes, okay, 11 minutes.
I can do this in 2 minutes. We have very minor changes to the fee directive, but this is one that we ask that you move forward for approval right now because we do start taking our shelter reservations 12 months in advance, so they do include the next year's costs on there. So as you will see in your packet, what's being proposed for fees, we have some minor increases to, we had a daily pass for our boat launch increased by $1. And then we had, so the main, let's see, we had an increase in our demo equipment, which I don't think that one's used all that much. We had increases to our 400 block park fees for 2021, so that's where we get into that year in advance as people, when we get into January 1st, they can already do it for January 1st of next year. We have our shelter increases, so those are highlighted. We also have an increase to our Memorial Park bench, which we took the actual cost, that's the actual cost. So we're not making any money on what it takes to put down the concrete pad in the bench. This is what it costs to put in a bench. So at $700 before, we were only recouping 50% of our costs to do that. And then we, the other item of note is on our tennis courts, for commercial and private use only, we added pickleball court to the tennis/pickleball court. And then for private and commercial use, we've had input from people that there are some private lessons going on out there, and we haven't allowed that on our other courts or our ball fields to have people use our facilities for free to make money. So in this sense, if they were renting it to make money or to get a profit, we increased that from $5 a court to $10 a court. And then some minor program updates.
That same policy hold forth for use of baseball fields?
Correct, should.
Thank you.
Yes. And then the one other point that I wanted to bring out is I did include a memo in your packet as well of some changes we're going to be making to the 2020 swimming lessons. So you'll see a decrease in the cost of the swimming lessons, but we want to provide more swimming lessons and provide more efficient swimming lessons. Instead of having them 3 weeks long, we'll have them 2 weeks with a makeup week in the middle of each of the sessions for rain dates, and then we're going to be adding some night sessions on Sunday evenings and Monday and Wednesday evenings for requests from, working parents that can't bring their children during the day. So the cost per class is still the same as it was. It's now that we're just offering two-week sessions of 10 classes instead of 15 classes, and we're changing that accordingly, and we're increasing the efficiency of our swimming lessons. So those are changes to our fee schedule that we're looking for approval from tonight.
Move to approve, Mr. Chair.
Very good. A second? Thank you. I have one question. It said the fee schedule also includes the addition of a payment per tree in lieu of tree replacement and the cost of a memorial bench. Is that the $1,500?
The $1,500 is the memorial bench. The tree replacement is on page 10 of, it says 10 on the bottom, and it's trees, payment in lieu of tree replacement, $350 per tree. This is a policy that we'll be bringing forward that will stem out of that forestry specifications manual that we'll be working with our engineering and our planning department on. If a developer comes in or takes down trees that are unauthorized, there will be a cost. They'll either be required to replace the tree, or they'll be able to choose that they can pay the fee instead of replacing that tree. And that cost right now is $350 per tree. And that can be tweaked as we work on this policy as well.
Very good. I think the proposed fees look eminently reasonable. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes. We can launch into educational items, River Life Park update and roll.
Yeah, so we are putting in the bike share program in mid-September. The pads will go in 2 weeks for the program, and then someone will be on site. They're currently looking for a mechanic, so you may have seen posting for a mechanic for the bike share program that the company that we're contracting with will be having to take care of the bikes. To answer some questions that had come up, we are continuing to plow the trail in the winter. This trail's been plowed for the past few years, even before the park was built, and we'll continue to plow it, so that will not change. And then there was some questions about the care of the port-in-place rubber surfacing, so I did include in your packet the required surface cleaning and maintenance guidelines that we'll be following from the manufacturer, and working with them. If we come across with anything that we can't clean up, we will work definitely with them, because we don't want to ruin the warranty or ruin the surface. But we are also, with that, as I mentioned at the last meeting, still working on some better use guidelines for the park, and doing more of a fun park signage that will include some of the recommended, uses or non-uses of the park. We don't have staff down there to regulate of whether or not people are eating on the playground or chewing gum, but we can work on that signage to get that up there about what we would recommend not being on the surface.
Maybe we could take those CSOs that are at the ball game down to the park.
Yep.
I have a question. Did we ever get the water fountains hooked up before we have to turn them off before they freeze?
No, not yet. The one by the playground is hooked up, and they are waiting for a test on it from, I believe, the water department. But that one, it was waiting on a new meter that was in request of the water department. The one that was spec'd was not appropriate because it was underground. So that one should be working shortly. I haven't checked it today, but it should be working very shortly. The one down by the wharf is still an issue that staff is working through with the developer, because it was damaged with the Samuels development. And so because it was part of that development, is a question of how does it need to get fixed? What will happen to it if it does get fixed with the new development coming in? So the wharf one will not be up and running yet this year. I think that's something that's still working through. The one by the playground will be up and running.
Oh, good. Well, we don't have to worry about winterizing it then.
No, not that one. And we did get the fire pit fixed. We were waiting on a part. Once we got that part, we fixed it, and then a different part went out. So now it is fixed. It's working as of last Friday. It is up and running, so.
Keep talking.
Okay. Dog Park Special Committee update, I guess really quick. The fence is ordered. It will be here at the end of October. You'll see that it might be getting very brown out there. Our staff, the Public Works Department, mowed it down. Our staff is killing off the weeds out there, and it will be seeding it. If they haven't already, at the end of last week, they'll be seeding it within the next week or so, so that we are still on schedule to have it ready in the spring. Once the fence goes up, that will be much better for that seed, but it's nice to get it seeded before the fence goes up. A temporary sign will be installed this week, I believe. We got a banner that says, new urban dog park, city's first new urban dog park coming soon, with a picture of it. It'll be going up on the site. The sign is in care of our operations division. It's just when it gets up, so that will be going up. And then they're continuing to work on fundraising items and events.
Yeah, last count, we're at about, was it $19,000 in contributions, and upwards of $60,000 to $75,000 in requests.
Yeah. Yep.
Are we recycling any of that Great Lakes cheese fencing?
We are not. The committee chose not to because of the cost savings weren't significant enough.
Very good. Keep talking.
I don't have to go through all the park project updates, but if there's any questions on any of them, I'd be happy to answer. We continue, we do all of this, but we still continue to work on our storm damage. Apparently, we had another couple hundred trees go down in the northeast section of the city last night that we weren't aware of, most of them are private trees, but we are constantly chasing that right now. So.
Please tell the committee what you told me about the discovery of emerald ash borer within the city limits of Wausau.
Currently, it has still not been officially found within the city limits of Wausau. We are watching for it. We are continuing to remove trees where there's construction needed or trees that are in poor health. We did treat about 1,000 trees this year, which wasn't quite our goal of half, but with a lot of other factors, we didn't get to all of them. We'll continue to do that. But as we go out, we are continuing to look, but officially it has still not been identified in the city limits.
You done?
Yeah.
Very good. Future agenda items, other than the obvious, or Riverside Park?
Just a little one, either the Bike and Pet Committee or the River Committee. I'm getting more and more requests, especially from people using the trail, especially on River Life, with regard to some kind of striping maybe down the middle. I think it's big, with the popularity of that trail, it's becoming, between bicyclers and strollers and pedestrians, I've been hearing that it's becoming sort of an issue. So maybe that belongs in Bike Ped, but I think we should start to be thinking about some kind of a striping down the middle or something so that people know exactly where they should be and not causing issues with other people walking or bicycling or strollers or whatever.
That might be something really good to pass on to our River's Edge Trail Plan, that, the River's Edge Master Planning is going on right now, to include those comments. So I'll pass those on to City Planning as we work on the entire trail system that maybe want to be looked at by the consultants.
Very good. As usual, if you think of other things for the agenda, holler. Somebody else have something?
Well, the only thing I was going to say is dovetail off of Mr. Gisselman's remark was that maybe we might stripe or mark that area to dismount and walk your bikes past the ice cream place because people are rocketing through there at times, and there's a lot of congestion at that moment when people are stepping off with their ice cream and not paying attention to the bicyclists coming through. But that's a thought to consider also.
Thank you.
To address that really quick, we have discussed that, and we think what we're going to do with that is put a paint stripe on the trail before you get to the park on both sides that says caution, children playing, or something like that. It had come up, I think, Mr. Neal, you might have suggested it too at one point, but that one, I think, yes, is definitely something we can work on internally as staff to get that marked.
Very good. Is there a motion that we will all agree to 100%? Motion to adjourn from Mr. Neal, second by Mr. Gisselman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing none. Pass. Thank you very much.